Maybe today you feel under fire, too many burdens, too many voices, too many doubts. You feel the ground cracking beneath you, and problems show up without knocking. Betrayal hurts, anxiety tightens, the medical report weighs heavy, money doesn't stretch far enough. And in the midst of all that noise, a lie echoes over and over again. You're alone. But listen, before talking about giant storms or battles, let's start with the right beginning, your identity. You are not what happened to you. You are not your failures. You are not the labels others put on you, nor the ones you believed yourself on your darkest nights. You are who God says you are. And when that truth moves from your ears to your heart, something changes in the way you walk. Your back straightens, your eyes lift, and the voice of guilt no longer rules. Because the toughest fight isn't against what surrounds you, it's against what your mind tells you when you're weary. The enemy doesn't need to push you if he can make you forget who you are. That's why he attacks with comparisons, old guilt, selective memories of everything that went wrong. He wants you to see yourself as small, unworthy, late for everything. But God doesn't look at you through your achievements. He looks at you through his love, and his love doesn't come and go like the weather. He already decided to call you son, daughter, purchased, chosen, not because of what you did, but because of what Christ did. Think carefully about this. When you forget your identity, everything else unravels. You begin to tolerate what you should never tolerate. You accept crumbs when you were invited to the table. You hide when you were called to shine. But when you return to your name, the name God gave you, you recover your stance. You don't walk defensively. You walk on mission. Maybe you say, "Yes, but I don't feel like that today." Perfect. Because this truth doesn't depend on what you feel. Identity in God is not a feeling, it's a certainty. There will be days you won't see yourself as strong, and yet you will still be, because His Spirit sustains you. There will be days your faith comes out in whispers, and still heaven hears you. God didn't choose you for your brightest days. He chose you knowing in advance about your storms. Let me make it simple. God isn't waiting for you to be perfect before backing you up. He isn't impressed with your high moments, nor scandalized by your low ones. His faithfulness is more stubborn than your ups and downs. When you say, "I can't go on," He responds, "I'm still here." When you see yourself as broken, He sees fertile ground to start again. When you see an ending, He whispers, "This is preparation." And here's a truth that disarms accusations. You are not a label. Maybe someone called you unstable, difficult, a failure. Maybe you've repeated to yourself, "I can't, I'm not worthy, I'll never make it." God doesn't sign those phrases. He calls you by what He planted in you. A chosen lineage, a holy nation, a royal priesthood. That means you're not wandering aimlessly. You belong. You have a home, a father, an inheritance. And when you belong, the battle stops being a desperate race to survive and becomes a march with purpose. Now, what changes in practice when you remember who you are? Your inner dialogue changes. Where you used to say, "I'm not enough," now you say, "Christ in me is enough." Where you used to hide, now you step forward. Where you used to carry everything alone, now you surrender it. Not because you turn to stone, but because you learn to lean. Faith is not gritting your teeth. It's resting your heart on a God who never fails. Be honest with yourself. How long have you been fighting shadows born from forgetfulness? How many decisions did you make out of guilt instead of peace? How many doors did you accept because you felt you didn't deserve better? Don't blame yourself today. Change it. Return to what God has declared about you. I'm not asking you to feel it. I'm inviting you to believe it. And what you believe in time shapes what you feel. Let me give you a simple but powerful exercise. Take a minute and quietly declare, almost like speaking from within, "I am who God says I am." He has my back. I do not walk alone. It's not a magic phrase. It's alignment. It's returning to the right frequency when the noise has thrown you off. Maybe you're thinking, but what about my mistakes? Bring them. God doesn't ask for perfection. He asks for sincerity. Sincerity opens the door for His grace to do what you cannot. And when His grace enters, it doesn't just clean, it reorders. It puts you back where your steps regain. Meaning, identity doesn't just defend you. It gives you authority. Not authority to crush people, but to set limits on fear, discouragement, lies. When you walk as a child, you stop negotiating with what robs your peace. You begin to say, enough, to what bound you for years, not from anger, but from conviction that heaven has your back. The voice that once made you doubt, you now answer with promises. The guilt that once made you retreat, you now face head on and say, I've been forgiven, I'm moving forward. If at this point you feel a small flame inside you, guard it. Identity is a fire fed by the Word, by honest prayer, by healthy community. You don't have to be a lone hero. God designed you for family. So if this message builds you, if it does good to your soul, don't keep it just for yourself. Share, comment, leave a like. This isn't about the algorithm. It's about opening a door for someone who has nowhere else to hear faith. Sometimes one click is a seed. And if you want to publicly declare what you're believing privately, write this phrase in the comments. Simple, but full of faith. God always has my back. That's it. Not to add numbers, but to seal in your heart what heaven reminded you today. Keep this for the journey. You are not your past. You are the work God is doing now. You are not your fears. You are the child learning to trust. You are not drifting. You have direction, even if today you can't see the map. Take a deep breath. Say it again. I am who God says I am. Let that phrase anchor you when the waves rise. Because when your identity is secure, battles fall into place. The ones you must fight, you fight with peace. The ones you must release, you surrender without guilt. And in both, God is with you. And as you remember who you are in God, it's vital you also don't forget something deeper. You do not walk alone. Even when you don't feel it, even when your eyes can't see it, there is a presence surrounding you like an invisible shield. That presence is the reason you're still standing when everything else collapses. The one who holds your soul on days when your body doesn't want to rise. The one who reminds you that even in your fragility, there is eternal refuge. Think for a moment, how many times have you been on the brink of collapse and suddenly an unexplainable calm filled you inside? How many times were you convinced there was no way out, and at that moment, an opportunity, a word, a person showed up to change the course? That wasn't coincidence. It was God's touch, manifesting silently, like someone stroking your soul without making a sound. The prophet Isaiah wrote a promise that still echoes today. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Notice that timeless word. Always, not sometimes, not only on good days, not only when you pray eloquently or when everything goes well, always. That means even in your doubts, even in your darkest nights, even when you think you've failed too much, He is still there, firm, unmoving by your side. God's presence is not like an emotion that comes and goes. It is more constant than your own breathing. It isn't measured by how spiritual you feel or how much you do, because it doesn't depend on you. It depends on His faithfulness, and His faithfulness is unshakable. He is there when you celebrate and when you weep. He is there in your fervent prayer and in your weary sigh. He is there in the crowded temple and in your empty room. You don't need masks before Him. because his presence grows stronger in your sincerity, not in your appearance. Remember Elisha's servant. They were surrounded by an enemy army, and he panicked. But Elisha prayed, "Lord, open his eyes so he may see." And suddenly the young man realized that while his human eyes saw threat, the invisible was filled with chariots of fire protecting them. That's how you are. Maybe you don't perceive it, but there is a heavenly army on your side. You are not walking unprotected, not facing the storm alone. Angels encamp around you, and you don't have to go far back in history to see it. Think of those moments when you were sure you would fall, but somehow you remained standing. Think of those tears that seemed endless, and then suddenly you woke up with renewed strength. That's God. That's his invisible covering. Sometimes it shows up in small things, a timely hug, a song with the exact words, a verse that appears out of nowhere, just when you needed it. God doesn't always shout. Sometimes he whispers, and even then, his voice transforms more than any noise. Maybe today you find yourself in a desert. Deserts are uncomfortable, painful, exhausting, but they're also the places where the pillar of cloud and fire is clearest. It's there you discover your peace doesn't depend on the scenery, but on who walks with you. The enemy wants you to believe you're alone, that no one listens, that your faith doesn't matter. But the truth is, if you're still breathing, it's because God is still holding you up. So when fear knocks, when anxiety tries to dominate, repeat this truth as an anchor. God's presence is my invisible protection. Write it down on paper. Whisper it under your breath. Keep it in your heart. Because every time you remember it, you build a wall against the lie. The outside may shake, but as long as his presence covers you, your soul will stand firm. No weapon formed against you will prosper. No plan against you will succeed. No storm will mark your end. Because what the enemy meant to destroy you, God transforms into testimony. And your testimony will be born from that certainty. You were never alone, never abandoned. There was always someone fighting your battles in silence. So when you feel strength fading, don't punish yourself. Don't think it's the end. Breathe deep and remember there's an invisible shield around you. You may not see it, but you notice it in the peace that endures, in the hope that still beats, in the faith that refuses to die. And as long as that presence is with you, nothing and no one can bring you down. And though his presence covers you, life sometimes hits so hard it feels like you've lost the battle. It isn't easy to look at a loss and believe there's purpose behind it. It isn't easy to go through betrayal, failure, closed doors, and believe it can become part of your victory. But hear this today: in God's kingdom, apparent defeats are not endings, they're processes. They are the workshop where he forges your character, the school where you learn to trust beyond the visible. Look at Joseph. His brothers sold him, he was falsely accused, forgotten in prison. Doesn't it look like a record of defeats? But in reality, it was an invisible plan, a silent preparation to place him at the highest position in Egypt. Every tear, every confinement, every betrayal, it was all part of a greater design. What seemed to bury him was actually the staircase lifting him higher. The same is true for you. What seems like loss today may tomorrow be the platform God uses to show you his faithfulness. We see isolated moments like disconnected photos. God sees the whole movie. We feel the pain of the present, but he is already looking at the glory to come. And even if today you feel like Joseph in the pit, even if your season smells like confinement, it doesn't mean God forgot you. On the contrary, it's in the dark that the light shines brightest. The righteous fall 7 times but rise again. That's the difference for God's children. Not that they never fall, but that they always find strength to rise again. And that strength doesn't come from within, it comes from above. Because God isn't waiting for perfection to use you. He uses your falls to show his power. He uses your tears to water seeds of hope. He uses your silence to train your ear to hear his voice deep within. Maybe this year didn't go the way you hoped. Maybe you lost things, people, dreams. Maybe you thought it was your ending. But don't forget, when the enemy says, "It's over," God responds, "I'm just getting started." What looks like destruction may be restoration. What looks like chaos may be the beginning of a new order in your life. What today you call defeat, tomorrow you'll remember as the place where God raised you stronger. The Apostle Paul understood this radically. He even said he boasted in his weaknesses, because in them, God's power was made perfect. Do you realize what that means? That your low moments are not the end, they're the stage where God shows himself greater. You don't need to hide your struggles. You can bring them into God's light and say, "I'm broken, but I still believe. I'm confused, but I'm still waiting. I'm wounded, but I'm still walking." And that act of faith moves heaven. So when you feel everything is lost, don't give up. God doesn't end with your defeats. He transforms them into victories. Every fall is a reminder you still have purpose. Every blow is evidence the enemy fears you, because he sees in you what you don't yet see. A child of God who, though stumbling, never stays down. Today, I want you to declare something in faith. Even if your heart is trembling, God transforms my defeats into victories. Write it down, repeat it, carve it inside you, because that phrase will be your shield when life tries to convince you you've lost. You haven't lost. You're in process. And in God's hands, the process always ends in glory. And even when you think you can't go on, remember this: the war doesn't end when you drop your arms, nor when the enemy celebrates too soon. Not even when your emotions scream it's over. The war only ends when God speaks the final word. And if he hasn't spoken of the end yet, then victory is still on its way. David understood this before Goliath. The entire army of Israel was paralyzed, staring at a giant impossible to defeat. No one dared move, because with human eyes there were no options. But David didn't walk by what he saw. He walked by what he believed. His faith in the living God was enough to change the story of a whole people. One stone in the hand of a young man was all heaven needed to bring down what seemed invincible. That's what happens when you stop looking at the size of the problem and start looking at the power of the one who fights with you. What giant stands before you? Maybe it's not a warrior with a sword, but anxiety that won't let go, an illness that wears you down, a loneliness that hurts, an uncertain future that frightens you. Look it in the eye and declare, "You are not fighting just me. You are fighting the God who has my back." Because that giant doesn't have the last word. And as long as God is your commander, no enemy can claim victory. The enemy wants to tire you out before the time. He wants to convince you to abandon the battle before it ends. He reminds you of past failures, uses outside voices to sow doubt, brings dark thoughts to your mind. But hear me, he has no authority over your destiny. He can roar, he can intimidate, but he cannot decide your ending. Only God has the power to close chapters. And while he hasn't, your story is still open, your hope still alive, your victory still reserved. Sometimes, God allows us to reach the limit, to show us his power doesn't depend on our strength. He brings you to the edge, so you'll learn it isn't your strategy that parts the sea, it's his voice. It isn't your skill that brings walls down, it's his presence. It isn't your bravery that defeats giants, it's his backing. When you feel you have nothing left to hold on to, that's when God shows up in all his glory, to remind you it was never about you. It was always about him. So instead of wasting energy thinking you've lost, lift your eyes and trust heaven is still writing your story. Maybe now everything looks gray. Maybe doors are shut. Maybe silence is all you hear. But don't be fooled. The war is still ongoing, and God hasn't given his verdict. And when he speaks, his voice will be final, his promise firm, his victory sure. Engrave it in your heart. It doesn't matter what others say. It doesn't matter what your circumstances shout. It doesn't matter what your emotions try to convince you of. The last word always belongs to God. And while he hasn't said it's over, there is still hope, still a path, still a battle to fight. So when hopelessness tries to settle in your mind, answer with this truth: God has the last word in my life. Repeat it until fear goes silent. Write it where you can see it. Make it your shield against discouragement. Because if God decides the ending, then the enemy has no power to stop you in the present. And in the midst of this war that isn't over yet, there is something that becomes your greatest resource, your shield, your way of staying standing when everything else shakes. Faith. Because you won't always be able to control what happens outside, but you can always decide how you respond inside. And when you choose to respond with faith, heaven moves on your behalf. Faith is not denying reality or pretending nothing hurts. Faith is looking at what hurts and declaring it will not have the last word. It's crying if needed, but still believing. It's trembling with fear and still taking the step. It's telling God, I don't understand anything, but I trust you. Faith doesn't always look strong. Sometimes it's as small as a sigh whispering, Lord, don't let me go. But even that small faith has the power to hold you in chaos. Think of the heroes of the Bible. Noah built an ark without ever seeing a drop of rain. Abraham left his land, not knowing where he was going. Moses stood before the sea with an army behind him and moved forward. None of them had all the answers, but they had one certainty: God never fails. And with that certainty, they walked into the impossible. That's faith, not having all the puzzle pieces, but trusting God's hand will put them together in His time. Maybe your faith today doesn't feel like before. Maybe you don't pray as strongly. Maybe the Bible feels heavy in your hands. Maybe doubts make more noise than hope. Don't condemn yourself. Faith doesn't disappear. Sometimes it falls asleep. And today God wants to wake it up in you. Because your faith is heaven's language. It's the key that opens closed doors. The bridge connecting the visible with the invisible. The weapon that defeats fears that look like giants. And listen, your faith not only sustains you, it inspires others. People are watching how you face this season. And when they see you still believing despite everything, they find hope for their own journey. Sometimes your perseverance is the only sermon someone needs to approach God. That's why your faith isn't just personal. It's also a lighthouse shining for those behind you. But for faith to grow, you need to feed it. It isn't enough to wish for it. You must cultivate it. How? With the word that reminds you of promises when your mind forgets, with prayer that connects you even when your words are weak, with sincere worship rising from your broken heart. Faith isn't fed by comfort, it's fed by dependence. And when you choose to seek God in the storm, your faith grows stronger than you can imagine. So next time doubt says, you can't take any more, respond with this declaration: my faith is stronger than my fear. Not because you're invincible, but because you believe in a God who never fails. That phrase can be your shield when the enemy comes with lies. Repeat it until your heart embraces it as truth. Understand this: faith doesn't eliminate storms, but it assures you you won't drown. Faith doesn't erase pain, but it reminds you it won't last forever. Faith doesn't remove battles, but it assures you you won't fight alone. With faith you may walk slowly but surely. You may stumble, but you will always rise again. You may cry, but never without hope. Your faith is the evidence that though you don't see the whole path, you still trust the one who designed it. And that decision, to believe even when nothing makes sense, opens space for God to do the impossible. So don't let go of your faith. Protect it. Awaken it. Declare it. Because in the middle of battle, faith is not only your response, it is also your victory in advance. And when your faith becomes your response, you discover a truth that changes the way you walk. You are not fighting alone because God goes before you. He doesn't wait for you to solve things before intervening. It's He who prepares the ground, opens invisible paths, tears down walls you didn't even know existed. And while you feel like you're advancing with trembling steps, you're actually following footprints He already marked for you. That means no obstacle enters your life without first passing through God's hands. Nothing that weighs you down today surprised Him. And if He allowed it, it's because it has a purpose greater than you can now understand. Sometimes He closes doors because He knew harm was behind them. Sometimes He delays answers because He first wants to strengthen your character. Sometimes He allows battles because He wants to show you don't fight alone, but under His banner. The same thing that happened to Israel when they left Egypt happens to you. God didn't take them by the shortest route, even though it existed. He led them by a longer path to protect them from wars they weren't ready to face. How many times in your life has the same happened? Roads that looked better closed. Opportunities you longed for slipped away. Relationships you thought eternal ended. And you know what? It was care disguised as loss. It was God saying, "Not yet, you're not ready yet. But I know exactly where I'm taking you." And there lies the key. Trusting when you don't understand. Believing when you can't see. Walking when it feels like there's no ground beneath your feet. Because it isn't your logic that sustains you. It's His faithfulness. He has promised to fight your battles. And if He fights for you, then the outcome is already decided. No hell is strong enough to stop a child walking backed by their father. So every time the storm tries to convince you it's over, remember this truth: God is with me, and while He is, nothing and no one can defeat me. That's your anchor. That's your certainty. That's the declaration more powerful than any enemy's lie. Now let me speak to your heart. You didn't get here by accident. This message is not just a speech, not just another video in the feed. It's God answering your silent cry. It's His soft voice reminding you are never alone, that your identity is secure in Him, that your defeats will become victories, that your faith will not be in vain, that your story doesn't end in the dark chapter. He is with you, and that's enough. So write this in your heart, and if you can, also write it in the comments as a declaration of faith. Today I walk with the certainty that God always has my back. Do it like someone planting a flag on the battlefield, like someone marking territory in their own soul, like someone choosing to believe even when circumstances scream the opposite. Because your life is not defined by the storm you're facing, but by the presence that accompanies you. And if God is with you, you already carry victory inside.